Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Marketing Made Great podcast. And I'm kind of excited again this week to have one of our guests. His name is Jamie Martin. He is the president, founder, chief bottle washer, and the guy that sweeps up at night for the Partners Marketing Group. So, Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
You're more than welcome. Now, for those of us that may not be familiar with you or your company, why don't you kind of share a little bit about how all of this crazy stuff called marketing got started in your life and brought you to this point, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure, sure. So, Partners Marketing Group turns 20 in February. I've
Wow.
been with the company for 19 of those years. So, I had a co-founder that started the company that I joined about 19 years ago. Um, I was working as a freelance web developer at the time, and when we first started out, we were doing small websites for colleges and small businesses. And over the years, that grew into an integrated marketing firm. We did, traditional marketing like
Sure.
sales collateral and brochure design and websites and everything in between. And today and for the last 6 or 7 years, we've been very much focused on digital marketing. That's always been my background, and it's where I've taken the company since 2013.
Okay. Very, very cool. Now, I have to say, the topic that you chose for today is kind of what most people would call a snoozer. Okay. But in my opinion, I think it's probably the most mission critical part of any business, especially in the digital world. And we're going to be talking about marketing, metrics, and lead attribution. All right. So I know that's going to be exciting.
It's exciting.
So,
It's super
I,
exciting.
well, and it actually is, and I think our discussion today will help companies really understand why metrics or measurement is critical to your business and helping it grow. So why should you even bother with measuring anything?
Uh, good question. I think that we live in a world, and especially in a country that is highly measured. We measure our
Sure.
success. Most Americans measure their success in economic terms, financial terms, and certainly a business's success is, 9.5 times out of 10 measured by financial success. We see that changing with things like certified B Corps, companies that are invested in doing good as well as doing well.
Sure.
But largely, businesses exist to make money, and so every business owner I know is certainly focused on their profit, their revenue. That end metric is certainly impacted by lots of key tinier metrics that add up to those things.
Yeah, I mean that those are the traditional metrics or measurements that we always like to look at. I mean, that's been around for hundreds of years as a measure of business. But in today's world, what sort of insights can or what sort of things, I should say, should you be measuring besides just a traditional math, so to speak?
Sure. So I think what's really new and interesting in the last 10, 15 years is the number of things that not only are measurable that add up to a
Mm,
sale or a new client engagement, or a new customer of some sort. There's so many metrics that we didn't have 15 or 20 years ago, and certainly not
true.
50 or 100 years ago. So with digital marketing, with the birth of the web and then social media, so much happens on a screen or device that is measurable. And if a business owner can figure out that there's a leak in their sales funnel, there's a problem in the process of going from awareness, interest, desire, action, and they can fill that gap, it can be a massive economic multiplier.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, from what I've seen over the years too, it's been interesting how you can really track really any aspect of behavior, emotion, and so forth by setting up all kinds of different points to measure. That's part of some of the insights that you can get from it. Um, you know, So what kind of measurement, or can we measure anything both online or offline or both?
We can measure almost everything online. The notorious sort of end of the road there is we can't measure what's happening between your two ears, even though you're using a device where every action
Sure.
is tracked and every scroll is tracked, et cetera. Offline, there are more metrics available today than there were 20 years ago, but measuring what happens offline is still difficult. So, for instance, 20 years ago, we may have had an estimate of how much traffic passes by a billboard, whereas today there may be a camera
Mm,
that's tracking the number of cars and knows exactly how many impressions
sure.
that billboard served. We might use things in the off world, in the offline world today to bring in some metrics. So when you see a TV commercial or a print ad and there's a special
Sure.
URL to go to or a code to enter, those are ways to attribute that ad source in the physical world to something that we can build into Google Analytics or your analytics software.
Sure. I mean, there, like you said, there's so many different data points now that we can look at, analyze. I mean, you could be overwhelmed by the data.
Yeah.
As we move into 2021, what do you think are some of those key metrics that businesses should be looking at or measuring?
Yeah. So the question is, it really depends. It depends on the type of business
Sure.
and what their goals are. So for a couple of examples, let's say that you're a retailer or an e-tailer, you're selling a physical product online, e-commerce business. Clearly, you're looking at sales as the success metric. That's an easily defined, end of the funnel process. But around that, you're probably also measuring these days, did that sale come from a new customer or repeat customer? Have they shown an
Sure.
affinity to a certain product category? Are you selling more of this product or that product? Looking at ad source attribution, you want to know if you're spending ad dollars in four different areas, are they all contributing to success in the same way? So a number of things that are very granular in the e-commerce retail side. We work mostly with not those type of firms. We work more with service-based businesses. We work with colleges. We work with businesses and organizations that have a longish sales cycle, might be a few weeks to a couple of years in some cases.
Right.
And in these cases, we're looking at harder metrics to make sense of. So we can see things like we're getting impressions from these ad sources, we're getting visitors on our website, we're getting engagement in social media. But it can be really hard to connect the dots, especially with the coming end of third-party cookies. It can be difficult to connect the
Sure.
dots and make sense of that data. So really, I would start with the end in mind. So if you own a
Sure.
business and in most cases, we're focused on a sales metric. Ultimately, breaking down like the sales process into smaller pieces and understanding where in the sales funnel might you be having trouble. Those are the
Sure.
types of metrics you want to start with at a high level.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, I think what you're saying too is that every business has that ideal customer profile, and these metrics or the things that you measure and collect confirms, validates, and also to strengthens or helps you even tweak and pivot a little bit to the right kind of customers and the right kind of offerings. When you think,
Exactly, and it can also challenge your assumptions. You might
oh,
have created
okay,
buyer personas that tell you that we have a client that's a quail hunting lodge in South Georgia, and we expect that their key audience is somebody that is male 95% of the time. They are high net worth. These are folks that often fly in on a private plane. Um, this lodge is about $1,000 a night, so this is not for every
sure,
bird hunter. So we have this idea of that buyer persona, but we can use Google Analytics to look at who's actually visiting the site, who's filling out a lead form, who's calling, and we may find additional insights about the people that are visiting the site, including the interests that they have, the other things that they shop for.
Right.
It might challenge your idea of what their ideal target demographic is.
So with this data that you're starting to collect here, it sounds like all of this can basically transform or help you better create a sales and marketing effort for your company as well, right?
Yeah, exactly, Mark. I think one of the biggest challenges for marketers and for businesses deciding how to spend marketing dollars is there are so many channels. There's 1,000 times more TV channels as 30 years ago. There's and these matter way less than some newer channels like Facebook and social media. It's really difficult to know where to put your efforts. Metrics like analytics and lead attribution can help advertisers and businesses know, is this effort working out? Should I continue to write that blog, advertise in Google, etc.
Well, I heard you use one of them big fancy marketing words
Uh-huh.
called lead attribution.
Yeah,
Can you help me and my audience understand that
sure.
maybe a little better?
Yeah. So a long time ago, I'd say maybe 12 or 15 years ago, we got to a point where we were frustrated that we thought a certain design would be more successful than another design. We thought
Sure.
that a page layout would work, a button position would work, etc. And we found that with analytics, we could start to prove that this was working or that was working better, worse, et cetera. And that's really about optimization and split testing, A/B testing, things like that. Lead attribution is a hugely important part of this, though. If you're advertising, let's say you're advertising in a print publication still, we have a few clients that do. You're also advertising in Google, so paid search. You're also paying an SEO to make sure that you've got organic visibility. And let's say that you're also spending monthly on a social media campaign, maybe Facebook or LinkedIn.
Right.
You want to know what you're getting from those investments of time and expense. You can know in all of those cases how much traffic are you getting from that investment, how many leads or sales are you getting, and you can simply divide the amount that you spent from the leads or sales revenue to get things like cost per lead or cost per acquisition.
Sure.
So lead attribution is simply about knowing where your leads are coming from, which ad source, which traffic source.
And customer acquisition costs too. I think it's,
Exactly.
I mean, if you're spending like I've heard clients spend, their product's $100, but it's costing you $1,000 to acquire them. Probably need to change.
Yeah, yeah.
Just a
And
little bit.
that's a good reminder that all of the math in this world is arithmetic. It's not
Huh.
calculus, it's not geometry, it's not trigonometry. It's simple math. It's
Okay.
division and multiplication mostly. And so even though it can be a glut of data to look at, and there can be challenges with understanding the data, the math is pretty simple. So yeah,
Well,
I spent $1,000 in Google Ads. I got one lead. That was $1,000 cost per lead. Is
right.
that lead worth $100,000? It's basic math.
Right. I mean, thank God it's basic math because that's about all I can handle. If it's not on a calculator, I can't do it. And I'm not talking a scientific calculator. So with all this information now that we have access to, where should we kind of start or build a foundation from, and what might be some of the pitfalls we need to watch out for?
Yeah, I'd say the one of the biggest pitfalls is it's overwhelming. Where do I even start? What I've heard on this podcast, for instance, is really interesting, but how do I do that? Is there a product I buy? Do I have to hire somebody, et cetera?
Sure.
It can be overwhelming to know where to start. And I can talk about some ideas for how to break this down and make it simpler. After you've found a starting point, the data itself can be overwhelming. So is this an important metric? Is this more important? What does this mean? What does that mean? Oftentimes when I'm talking with my clients about a report, we may look at an aggregate data trend. Maybe it's visitors over the last 3 years by month. and we can see a strong growth trend where we're getting more visitors every month over 3 years. And the client can say, oh, that's great. But we might look at it and say, well, a lot of that traffic isn't people that are buying or considering to buy or becoming a lead, et cetera. So we've got to dig into the data more. So misunderstanding the data or not quite understanding how to put data together can be difficult as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, please.
Well, one of the things too that I've been shocked at over the years is, Google offers a free service called Google Analytics.
Yep.
And when you ask somebody, well, what kind of traffic do you get to your website? And they kind of go, you mean we can do that? And you can do it for free?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Google Analytics should be foundational.
Absolutely.
And it's like you said, it's free, but it gives you at least a clue as to where they're going through your site or whatever and what they're spending time on. So let me ask you a question. One of the things I'm seeing really popular right now is a thing called Google My Business. Do you have a thought about that or any input?
It's almost as critical as Google Analytics, especially if you have a brick and mortar business,
Sure.
any business that people are going to come into your store for. You definitely want to not only have a Google My Business listing, you want to have verified that listing, and you want to be actively managing it. When people write reviews, you want to respond to those reviews, positive or negative. You want to make sure that your hours are up to date, especially as the holidays approach. Google My Business is oftentimes the way that people interact with your business before they ever reach your website, if they ever do. If I'm looking for directions or hours, Google My Business is going to have a large impact on Google local search results. So hugely important and also free.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And you're right. So the two really good basic starting points then is Google Analytics and Google My Business.
For sure.
And from there you can get crazy, but should, besides the obvious part of time, what kind of dollars or expense should a business allocate to analytics and measurement?
Yeah. So, going back to Google Analytics, I'd say start free. Don't buy anything.
Sure.
You'll find a lot of competitors to Google Analytics that are not nearly as good. But people have this idea that you get what you pay for, and so they may try to go buy an analytics package. Start with free. From there, look at your specific needs and where you've got blind spots. So, for instance, Google Analytics is an enterprise level software, something that I could see them charging thousands of dollars a month for. That's the value of the insights to a lot of our clients who are small businesses. But there are blind spots in Google Analytics. For instance, we don't have IP address data in Google Analytics. We don't have any identifiable information at that level. We don't have heat maps in Google Analytics. We don't have real-time recording in analytics
Sure.
to actually watch sessions. So the next level of tools that we might look at for those specific needs could be things like Hotjar, Lucky Orange, ClickTail. Google Analytics doesn't do any call tracking, and most businesses are doing business over the phone. Not an e-tailer necessarily, but most businesses are still using a phone. You want to be able to track inbound calls, what ad source they came from. Was that a good call? Was it handled correctly? Did we do sentiment analysis on the call to say we're getting a lot of complaints through customer support? So looking at call tracking services like CallRail, based here in Atlanta, one of the number 30 on the Inc. 500 recently.
Oh, wow.
And then also keep in mind that you already have analytics and insights and other metrics in the tools that you're already using. So almost any small business is going to have an ESP like MailChimp or Constant Contact. You've got a wealth of data there. The ad platforms that you use from LinkedIn, Facebook, et cetera, you've got things there. And there's one other free tool that I think is when we talk to clients, prospects, we'll ask them to load this, whether we end up working with them or not. And that's LinkedIn Insights. It's a snippet of code that goes on your site that takes what LinkedIn knows about people, their job title, the company they work for, their years of experience, things like that, and tells you based on your website traffic what companies are visiting your website, what their job
Wow.
function is, et cetera. And that's free.
Wow, that's I didn't even know that. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna have to make
Yeah.
sure I do that right away. That's fantastic. So, all this data, and if we've got a medium-sized company, we're collecting all this information and we're going to put it in a fancy report and give
Mhm.
it to somebody. How often do you think leadership or senior management ought to review and look at this kind of, information and analytics?
Yeah. So again, I think it depends, and your audience that's listening to this may range from a small business owner with no employees that is doing this him or herself.
Sure.
I'd say at that level, you probably want to be looking at this on a weekly basis initially until
Mm,
you get a handle on things and know what you're looking for specifically, and then maybe you're looking at it monthly. If you're the president of a company and you have maybe an SEO firm or a paid search firm or a digital marketing firm like ours, that's putting this data together for you, providing analysis and insights, maybe providing reporting, and then a monthly or biweekly call to review that. Look at it monthly as needed, up to
sure.
quarterly if it's hey, this firm is doing the work for us and I see that we're moving in the right direction. It's that we have a few clients that are not data scientists but are huge
Mm,
data nerds. We've had attorneys that love data. We've had an investment banking firm whose partners that love data. We have other clients that don't care at all, but some of our clients are looking at this stuff daily because they see the impact that it's having or could have on their business.
fantastic. As we start to wind down, I really appreciate all the information you shared with our audience. And a lot of it, as far as websites and resources, we'll make sure we link it in the show notes. But again, I mean, you gave us a good starting point. And one of the things I like to do here towards the end of the show or this episode is I like to do what I call the lightning round. It always fascinates me when I talk to marketing people. What is your favorite all-time commercial to date? Could be radio, TV, I don't care. What do you is your favorite?
So I think a lot of people I like a lot of people think to the Apple 1984 commercial. I was 12. I was at my friend's watching the Super Bowl. That was the Super Bowl Shuffle with the Chicago Bears. Um, I didn't see that commercial and say, I want to go into advertising, but that's a commercial that really stands out as
Mm,
it's sort of changing advertising and not just introducing Apple in a way that people hadn't thought of Apple before.
sure.
Um, but that's a classic. But really, the another commercial that comes to mind that I haven't thought of in a long time was in the mid '90s. Volkswagen had a series of commercials that were just very very creative. One had a Nick Drake theme song and
Sure.
just this romance around Volkswagens before they got busted cheating on their cafe standards.
Well, I know, and it's funny that one of the ads that is one of my all-time favorites from Volkswagen is Wilt Chamberlain standing right next to one. Can I fit in this? No, I can't. And it goes into telling the story, and it's to me, it's a classic. So with the
Yeah,
best,
yeah,
there's always the worst.
yeah,
What
yeah.
are some of the worst ones you've run across?
The worst ad for me, like everyone else, is the one that gets stuck in your head that you've seen way too many times. Maybe on television, often on television,
Sure.
sometimes a jingle. I am fond of saying hide this ad in Facebook to let advertisers know I've seen this way too many times. I watch a lot of CNN and MSNBC, and I think there's a lot of frequency advertisers there, and so any pharmacy ad for some made up name, those get
Sure.
old pretty quick.
Now I understand. So another question I always like to ask marketing people is what is the best campaign that you developed that you spent the least amount of money and the least amount of time on but got amazing results?
That's a really good question. First, I love when that happens. It's super rare.
Right.
Typically we are iterating and iterating and iterating to tweak a 0.5% difference in a campaign
Sure.
response. But about 5 years ago, we were working with a training company, and they were selling a $3,000 boot camp, like 4-day boot camp training thing. And they hired us to do their paid search marketing. And we looked at the landing page that we're using. It was all text. It was pull out your credit card and buy this or don't. And we developed a
Sure.
fairly simple landing page that had a picture of a person that looked like a potential student, talked about their benefits. It was far more graphical. And 5 years ago, looking at a dozen competitors, those pages were also very text heavy and boring. And so our page
Mhm.
really stuck out as being, just more interesting and human. And they went from getting about 10 leads a month to 3 leads a day the first day that landing
Oh, wow.
page launched. So really effective. We
Wow.
actually used a variant of that landing page 4 years later. So we just redesigned those landing pages in a dramatic way last year.
Oh, wow. Very, very exciting. That's kind of cool. So I also too like to ask this little box that seems to still be prevalent in everybody's house
Yeah.
called the TV. Do you think it's dead, on its way out? Where do you see its future, or is there a future?
Yeah, I think it has a strong future. I mean,
Okay.
if you have kids, especially, well, any kids really, they're not looking at the literal television as much because they're looking at a screen in their hands. But
Sure.
so many Americans have a connected TV these days, so they're not watching over the air. So most nobody watching over the air television, and many of them have cut the cable, have cut the cord on cable, so they're
Sure.
watching a digital streaming service. They're getting their ads through that service. I think 5 to 10 years ago, it was fun to debate what happens to TV commercials. Expense was going higher and higher. The actual view rate was plummeting because we all just skip through the commercials when we can.
Sure.
Um, but we see ads popping up in other ways. And with connected TV, you've got unskippable ad formats. You've got
Right.
native ads that look like the actor in the show that you were just watching. So I don't think that video based ads, where you call those TV commercials or YouTube spot ads, I don't think that those are going away. They're really exploding, and with more
Yeah, I
measurement.
no, and I agree 100%. I mean, I remember the days when there were only three channels, and the Munsters. If you didn't watch that episode that night, and you went to school the next day, you were left out. You weren't
Yeah,
the cool kid
yeah,
at
yeah,
lunch. Okay.
yeah.
Now you can record it and watch it 5 years from now,
Sure.
and zip through the commercials.
Yeah,
And now it's really content on demand.
sure.
I couldn't understand why Netflix dropped the all 20 some odd episodes of House of Cards the moment it came out for the first time.
Hmm.
Now we expect it.
Yeah,
Binge
yeah.
watching episodes or shows are expected now. And I find that fascinating, that evolution. So let me ask another question to kind of see where you're at. What do you think are the top one or two emerging marketing technologies or strategies that you're kind of watching or investigating right now, if any?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that something that's really interesting to me that hasn't exploded as quickly as I expected a couple of years ago is voice.
Mm,
Um, I have a colleague that talks a lot about voice, and when I listen to her, it feels like voice is going to sort of take over everything. I felt the same way a couple of years ago about AR and VR. I remember coming away from a talk at Georgia Tech 3, 4 years ago thinking that we wouldn't be designing two-dimensional screen experiences for much longer because everything would just be in an augmented reality,
sure.
sort of shape. And I think there could be like one breakthrough in wearable computing. Google Glass was a flop, of course, but there could be a breakthrough like the next version of Google Glass that all of a sudden within 12 or 18 months augmented reality, including all of the advertising and user behavior
Sure.
capture that goes along with it. Very Tom Cruise and Minority Report, that could be, an overnight sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's the cool factor is starting to become practical now
Hmm.
in everything that we're doing. So, one of the things too I always like to ask is, what books, podcasts, YouTube channels, or things that you're reading or watching for inspiration to get those creative juices going?
Yeah. So in our industry, I'd say if uh, lived on a desert island for a year and came back to your job, you would be an intern essentially. You'd go
Oh,
from 20
wow.
years of experience to none. So there's just so much change in digital marketing that it's important to keep up with the minutia of things that change. So unfortunately, a lot of the reading and learning I do is in short form articles online.
Sure.
The books that I'm reading might be about management, but I'm reading a few of them a year versus maybe 100 articles a week. Um, my favorite podcast for business anyway is the Two Bobs with David C. Baker and
Yeah,
Blair Enns.
it's a good one. Yeah.
Wonderful for business owners to listen to.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very good. If let me think here for a second. What one or two nuggets can you leave with our audience related to measurement and analytics that you'd like for them to walk away and either implement or at least investigate today?
Yeah, really good question. I think the first is to start small. Um, Google Analytics, for instance, it would take us less than 5 minutes to implement. If you aren't comfortable adding a line of code to your website, it might be something you ask for help with, but it's very quick to implement, and it's not retroactive. And so if you don't
Mm,
install it today, you miss today's data. So the sooner you do that, the better. And the second is to not become addicted to the charts and graphs that look pretty. Look at the data critically. Um, don't settle for the report that you put together or somebody put together. Be critical of that. Really understand like what matters. I see far too many new clients that are leaving a previous digital agency who did great with rankings, but never showed the connection between rankings and revenue.
mm.
So be sure that you're focused on the right metrics, even if they are the
Good point.
earlier funnel, earlier stage metrics that add up to the things that matter, like sales or leads. Dig into what really matters.
Yeah, no,
Validate.
I think that's great. Kind of. So our last question for our time together, and this has been great, Jamie. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk.
My pleasure.
Um, if you could sit down with any marketing guru and ask questions of that person, living or dead, who would you like to sit down with and maybe toss a glass of bourbon back with?
I frankly, I don't have that need because I get to have conversations with so many people like that every day. In other words,
Wow.
there's not a Gary V in my life that I'm dying to pick the brain of. The people that are interesting to me are pretty accessible. They're colleagues.
Cool.
They're in webinars. Or they're accessible through their books and podcasts, so their knowledge is out there. But I'm pretty connected to the design world and design thinking. Very connected to the digital marketing world, from the analytics and metrics side
Sure.
to the creative side. Um, just so many voices to hear there.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's great. And again, I appreciate you coming. Is there any last thoughts or comments that you would like to make before we call an end to this time together?
I want to ask you what your least favorite commercial is.
Oh, my least favorite commercial. Lately, it's been Duluth Trading. To
Hmm.
me, they're like, there's no point. I don't get them. They're missing, but I am talking about them. So I guess it did work. And the Liberty Mutuals, I know the agency that created them, they're amazing.
Yeah.
But again, I am talking about Liberty Mutual, so I guess it did work.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Those are probably the two that I see.
Yeah. Yeah. Insurance commercials, definitely very high frequency. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Jamie,
Well, I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, Jamie, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us right here on the Marketing Made Great podcast. And thanks for your time. And your episode will be up shortly.
My pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You bet.